In this video, we will cover basic dietary recommendations for carbohydrate, fat, protein, vitamins, and minerals in physical activity. Carbohydrates provide glucose, which is an important source of fuel for physical activity, and it's important to get the right amount of carbohydrate before, during, and after activity. On a daily basis, before an activity, you should be consuming carbohydrates. For most people, keeping carbohydrates at 45 to 65% of calories is sufficient. Now, if you want to know more exact numbers, which you don't need to know for a class, this is about 5 to 7 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram weight for moderate activity and up to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram for intense activities. Now, the longer the physical activity, so the more endurance athletes, they need more carbohydrates or carbohydrates on the higher end. Now, depending on duration, intensity, and training, which can improve glycogen stores, athletes may need to consume carbohydrate during an activity, and this helps to maintain blood glucose during activity. A sports drink such as Gatorade could be used to provide carbohydrates during an activity. For really long endurance activities, you might need to have some like power bars or other foods. Now, guidelines for carbohydrate intake during activity are usually based on time. So for example, if you're doing an activity that's less than 45 minutes, you really don't need to consume carbohydrate during the activity. If the activity is lasting 45 to 75 minutes, a small amount of carbohydrate, like the amount in a sports drink, such as a Gatorade or Powerade, can be helpful. And athletes who are working for 1 to 2.5 hours. So we're getting up above the 75 minutes. So if you're going 1 to 2.5 hours, you probably need about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate for every hour. You can get that from food or beverage. And for events that are lasting more than 2.5 hours, you can go up to as much as 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Now, this is a classic study that was done about 20 years ago. It shows the importance of carbohydrate intake for endurance. So in this study, they took 8 endurance-trained athletic men, and they had them cycle to exhaustion. So what that means is they cycled until they could not go anymore. And they did the trial twice. So they completed the cycling trial twice. In one part of the trial, they drank a sports drink that had carbohydrate, and you can see that on the graph in the CHO line. And the second time, they had a control that it was a sweet placebo, but it didn't have carbohydrate in it. And from the study, those who consumed carbohydrates were able to go 30% longer than those who didn't. Once you get done, how much carbohydrate do you need? You kind of have this sweet period of about 2 hours after eating where you should eat some high carbohydrate foods. And this includes things like chocolate milk or crackers or orange juice, toast, cereal, sports drinks. Consuming the carbohydrate within 2 hours after the activity speeds the rate of glycogen synthesis and glycogen replenishment and recovery, and also enlarges glycogen stores. All right, let's talk about protein. Now, a lot of athletes wonder how much protein they need to consume as part of their regular diet before activities. Many don't need as much protein as they think they do. So let's first talk about the DRI. So recreational athletes, just, the general lay public, they should just consume the DRI for protein. And the DRI, or the RDA, recommended daily allowance for protein, is 0.8 grams per kilogram. Now, we also have recommendations. These are not the dietary reference intake. So these are not the DRI. These are recommendations from reputable sports and nutrition groups. And they generally recommend that athletes consume 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram per day, and they can go up to 2 grams per kilogram per day. Now, most athletes can easily meet their protein needs just by following a healthy diet like the USDA food pattern. Now, if we're looking at maximal muscle building, one of the key things to do is to break that protein intake up throughout the day. So you want about 20 to 30 grams of protein each time you eat, and break that up about 3 times a day. And just remember, to build muscle, you have to use the muscle. Just eating protein alone will not build muscle. Now, post-activity, protein is important because of its role in repairing muscle tissue after exercise. And we find that if you co-ingest protein and carbohydrate during the recovery period, it improves net protein balance post-exercise. So you want to ingest that protein during the hour or two following intense physical activity. That really accelerates muscle protein synthesis beyond the rate expected, either from activity or just protein consumption alone. So eating in that kind of 2-hour window. And in that 2-hour recovery window, you want to consume about 10 to 15 grams of protein. That leads to more accelerated recovery of muscle tissue. Research has shown that protein doses greater than 40 grams don't show any further augmentation during recovery. And now let's look at some examples of post-activity meals or snacks that contain both the protein and the carbohydrate, since we know you kind of have that 2-hour window where it's important to get both. You could have some crackers and cheese. You could have yogurt and fruit. You could have chocolate milk or a sandwich. And those are just very simple examples of ways to consume the carbohydrate and protein post-activity that's needed. All right, let's talk about lipids and activity. Now, fat is only burned in aerobic activity, and the body can adjust the release of fat from adipose tissue depending on the type of activity. So if you're doing an aerobic activity, the body delivers fat to muscle to burn. If you're doing anaerobic activity, those intense, quick activities, the body restricts lipid release. So as an activity continues, as the duration increases, more fatty acids flow into the blood to be used as fuel. And trained muscle burn fat at greater intensities than untrained muscles, meaning trained athletes move into fat burning and preserve their glycogen stores. For diet, you need about 20 to 35% of your calories from fat as an athlete, which is the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, or the AMDR, for the general population. Now, nutrient supplements really do not enhance performance of a well-nourished athlete or well-nourished active people. So if active people choose food correctly, they will get a sufficient amount of nutrients. Now, if someone is deficient in a nutrient, a vitamin mineral supplement can be appropriate. Or if there are athletes that are restricting calories, it's hard for them to meet their nutrient needs and they may need a supplement. So let's talk about a supplement that may be helpful, and that is iron supplementation for female athletes. So iron is needed to transport oxygen to the cells, so it's important in physical activity. And physically active young women are especially prone to iron deficiency anemia because they generally have habitually low intakes of iron-rich foods. They have high iron losses through menstruation, and then because they're physically active, there are higher demands of the muscles for iron. Now, we have this anemia called sports anemia. This is not iron deficiency anemia. So sports anemia is an adaptive temporary response to endurance training, like strenuous training such as running and hitting the pavement hard. That can lead to destruction of old, more fragile red blood cells. So generally, we don't treat this with iron because it's temporary and it goes away. It's just a temporary response to endurance training.